the Wooting 60HE, the iconic Hall effect keyboard. Except, this is not a Wooting 60HE, it's a clone and I paid like $50 for it, about a third of what the real Wooting 60HE costs. But could you even tell that this is not a real Wooting? Sure, these band thingies and the logos kinda give it away. I obviously swapped out the bands for the intro, otherwise this would have been a bit too easy. But without the bands and the logos, could you even tell? I mean, these are eerily similar, and it raises a series of uncomfortable questions. Like, is this okay? And is the performance just as similar as the design? When it comes to latency, accuracy, precision, typing sound, is the copycat just as good as the original? And if so, is it okay to buy a keyboard like this? Like, is it morally, ethically acceptable to buy a keyboard that clearly took more than just some inspiration from another product? Where do we draw the line? I mean, is this okay? This is another keyboard that was, you could say, heavily inspired by Wooting. It's made by MCHOSE, and MCHOSE put at least some effort into making it not too obvious that they copied Wooting's homework. At least it has a different layout that comes with arrow keys and additional side keys. And if you look closely, you can see that it's not trying to be an exact one-to-one copy of the Wooting 60HE. They copied the design language. That's pretty obvious, but this is not an outright one-to-one clone. It even adds some additional functionality to the design, like these height-adjustable feet. Personally, I find something like this a lot easier to stomach than a shameless clone. But the question really is, are these even good keyboards, or is the Wooting-inspired design just a way to trick you into buying a bad keyboard? Alright, let's pause for a moment to talk about the sponsor of this segment, Ugreen and their DH4300 Plus NAS. This NAS is designed to be your own personal cloud, a central, secure place for all your files. It holds up to 4 drives for a massive 120 TB of potential storage. But unlike with your typical cloud subscription, you maintain complete control over your files. Your data is stored locally on a device you own. And getting your Ugreen NAS up and running is easier than you might think. It starts with the installation of the drives. The top lid is held on magnetically, giving you easy access to the drive trays. The drives are screwed down on the trays and then simply slide into place. With NFC Quick Connect, you can then connect to the NAS just by holding your phone in front of the device. The user interface of both the mobile and Windows app is straightforward, giving you quick access to all the most important functions. Plus, with apps for Android TV and Apple TV, you can quickly access your files on pretty much any device you own without tedious configuration. This also turns the NAS into a powerful home multimedia hub. You can store your entire media collection on it and stream directly to your smart TV. So if you're looking for a better way to manage your files, back up your data, and build your own media library, take a look at Ugreen's series of NAS. Check out the links in the video description to learn more. Now back to the video. Okay, let's have a closer look at the obvious copycat. And you know, the Madlions Mad60HE really is just that. It's a straight up copy-paste job. The screw locations, the molding of the case, even from the inside, is almost a one-to-one copy. Slightly worse quality, but shape and layout are almost identical. So much in fact that you can put the PCB of the Mad60HE into the case of the Wooting 60HE and the other way around. It's insane. They didn't even try to make it a bit less obvious. When it comes to the typing sound though, and I kinda hate to say it, the Mad60HE does actually sound slightly better than the original. That is if we're comparing it to the entry-level Wooting 60HE pre-built. If you opt for a fully loaded config, it sounds a lot better. But to be fair, this is also a much more expensive keyboard. And finally, the Ace 68, which I think has the worst typing sound of the bunch. But what about the performance, latency, accuracy, and precision? The PCBs are definitely not the same, that much is clear, so there's a chance that these clones are just all surface. So let's start with measuring the latency. And here the story plays out pretty much like you'd expect. the Wooting 60HE is on top. It's still the fastest keyboard here. However, both the A68 and the Mad60 are right on its heels. We're talking about just roughly a single millisecond that's between the clones and the real 60HE. 2-point-something milliseconds is still very fast, and to be honest, in-game I personally don't notice any latency difference between these keyboards. But what about accuracy and precision? To test this, we set all keyboards to their most sensitive actuation point, 0.1 mm, and then use a digital height gauge to measure the exact moment they actually trigger. And here the Wooting is on top again, having the smallest top dead zone. But it's essentially tied with the A68. And the Mad60HE really isn't far behind either. But here we can also see that Madlions might have cut some corners in the firmware. The keyboard is extremely touchy. Even when I don't even touch the height gauge, it jumps between registering and not registering an input. This likely is because of poor filtering. Not ideal. However, the rapid trigger performance of the Mad60 is pretty impressive. If you believe what the interface says, rapid trigger should be able to kick in after just 0.01 mm of upwards movement, which is a bit too ambitious, but it kicks in after just 0.03 mm, which is very impressive still. The real shocker though is the A68. Its rapid trigger can be set to two different modes, 0.01 or 0.005 mm. And both modes react almost instantly after just 0.01 mm of movement, which is the smallest increment a height gauge can even detect. We might as well call this a perfect result. This is extremely impressive for such an affordable keyboard. The only other Hall Effect keyboard I've seen achieving this level of performance is the iQnix EZ80, which is a much more expensive keyboard. And the Wooting 60HE, it's at the bottom of the chart for rapid trigger. It's held back by its own software, which won't let you set rapid trigger to anything smaller than 0.15 mm. And its precision isn't great either, showing the highest deviation across these three keyboards. And this also puts the Wooting 60HE at the bottom of this graph, which shows the overall precision, a combined metric for how repeatable the key presses and releases are. And the two clones are actually tied at the top. Now, let's be clear, you shouldn't overestimate these results. It's not like the 60HE isn't precise or accurate enough for real-world use. It absolutely is. But what this data proves is that these cheap clones are not just surface-level copies. When it comes to core performance, they can keep up. And in some tests, they actually perform even slightly better than the keyboard they are copying, which is kind of ironic. So why would you ever pay more for the original Wooting 60HE when the clones perform this well? Sure, there are ethics concerns, but besides that, raw performance metrics are just part of what makes a Hall Effect keyboard good. The day-to-day experience of using the keyboard, the features it provides, the reliability and ease of use are important too. And it's well known by now that Wooting's software utility is close to perfect. It's feature-rich, it's easy to use, and it's virtually bug-free. The software of both of these clones, though, isn't nearly as polished, but I have to admit that both of them surpass the good enough threshold. They have most of the important features you'd want. Changing your rapid trigger and actuation settings is easy enough, and both of them support profiles and have working SOCD. But when you dig in, the crack starts to show, especially with Madlions. For one, it's missing on-keyboard profile switching. There's just no shortcut for it. So when you want to switch from your typing to your gaming profile or the other way around, you have to open up the software every single time. It's a small thing that becomes pretty annoying over time. Secondly, their mod tab feature is almost useless. It just doesn't allow the function key to be bound, so there's no way to set up the bottom right keys as arrow keys with the mod tab. The Wooting 60HE can do that no problem, and this is a pretty important feature to have on a 60% keyboard that obviously doesn't have arrow keys. Feels a bit like Madlions just copied mod tab from Wooting without really understanding why it's so useful on the 60HE. Personally, I prefer the MCHOSE software over Madlions. The interface is just a bit more user-friendly, and it has some additional quality of life features, like the section here that stores your inactive profiles that you can just drag and drop onto the keyboard. But the biggest argument for the MCHOSE software is that it actually supports on-keyboard profile switching. I've set up the keyboard so that Fn plus Enter switches between my typing and my gaming profile. It's super convenient and it's set up just like my Wooting 60HE. Now, really doesn't come as a surprise that Wooting is still on top when it comes to software, but I have to say that MCHOSE software is not too far behind really. It's mainly missing some polish. And let's be real, having superior software really is what carried Wooting in the past, and the software experience is a huge part of why people are willing to spend a bit more on a Wooting keyboard. So seeing the clones catching up on the software side must be pretty concerning for Wooting. And seeing how good these clones can hold up against the Wooting 60HE in pretty much all areas puts us in a bit of a difficult spot too. I mean, is it even okay to buy these keyboards? The performance is solid, no question. The quality is pretty decent as well, and the software is okay too. So if we ignore the design for a moment, for the money, these are pretty good keyboards. But I'm not sure if I can actually recommend them. I'm a bit torn, especially when it comes to the Madlions Mad60HE, the very obvious copycat. As far as I understand, what Madlions is doing here is not strictly illegal. It's hard to argue that they're not copying the look and feel of the Wooting 60HE, or trade dress as it's called, but the issue is there's a fine line between lawful mimicry and illegal imitation. And it's incredibly difficult to say whether Madlions crossed that line here or not. Legality aside, I think it's just a bit lame to copy the design of another product. I don't think it's an issue that they're selling this, but I personally much prefer Wooting alternatives that are not just clones of the 60HE, like the NuFi Halo 65HE or the MCHOSE A60. As opposed to the A68, the A60 is not trying to replicate Wooting's look, which I much prefer. If the Wooting 60HE is out of your budget, you don't have to go out and buy a straight up clone. Keyboards like the Halo 65HE or A60 are amazing non-clone alternatives. And if you really can't live without this band dangling from the side of your keyboard, the MCHOSE A68 at least has a spark of originality in its design, and it's also a slightly better keyboard than the Mad60HE. Thanks for watching, bis zum nächsten Video.